Last month, I watched a homeowner rip out $3,000 worth of dead perennials from their front yard. Every single plant had failed within 2 years. The culprit? 5 critical mistakes that most gardeners make during the initial planting phase. These errors don't just kill your plants, they eliminate the entire premise of long-term savings that makes perennial gardening worthwhile. The 7 secret perennials we'll examine today can thrive for decades with minimal care when properly installed, delivering genuine cost savings through their natural longevity and low maintenance requirements. Today, we're exposing the exact installation mistake that cost you thousands and the precise correction methods that ensure your perennials deliver $15,000 in savings over 20 years. The first mistake happens before you even consider which plants to buy. The spacing disaster begins the moment gardeners place perennials at half their mature width apart, believing this arrangement creates immediate visual impact and faster coverage. This decision triggers a biological competition that weakens every plant from establishment onward. When Echinacea cultivars rated for 3-foot spreads are planted 18 inches apart, their root systems immediately begin competing for the same water sources, nutrient deposits, and soil space within overlapping territories. The competition operates like a battlefield beneath the surface, where stronger root systems commandeer resources while weaker plants gradually decline. Overcrowded perennials develop shallow, tangled root networks instead of the deep, robust systems that ensure long-term survival. This stunted root development makes plants vulnerable to drought stress, disease infiltration, and pest infestations that would never affect properly spaced specimens with established root territories. Within 18 months, dense plantings create humid microclimates around plant crowns where fungal spores proliferate and bacterial diseases establish persistent infections. Air circulation becomes restricted, preventing the natural drying cycles that healthy perennials require. By the third growing season, overcrowded perennials begin exhibiting the characteristic center death pattern, where inner sections of clumps die while outer edges struggle to survive. This creates unsightly gaps that require immediate replanting, destroying the aesthetic goals that motivated close spacing initially. Professional landscapers calculate spacing using a simple formula: space plants at their full mature width apart, center to center. A Rudbeckia variety with a 2-foot mature spread requires plants positioned 2 feet apart, center to center, ensuring adequate root territory and air circulation space between mature canopies. This formula prevents the resource competition that forces expensive replanting cycles throughout the garden's lifespan. The economic consequences of improper spacing compound exponentially over time. Gardens planted with correct spacing specifications survive 20 years or more with minimal replacement costs, while overcrowded installations require complete replanting every 4 to 6 years. The initial cost savings from purchasing fewer plants disappears within the first replacement cycle, then multiplies into thousands of dollars over 2 decades. Nurseries contribute to this spacing disaster by displaying plants in their juvenile forms without explaining mature size requirements. Display gardens at retail centers typically show perennials at peak establishment size rather than their eventual spread, misleading customers about space requirements. Sales staff often lack the technical knowledge to provide accurate spacing guidance, focusing instead on immediate visual impact rather than long-term plant health. The root competition created by improper spacing extends beyond individual plant survival to affect soil health throughout the planting area. Overcrowded root systems deplete nutrient reserves faster than natural decomposition, and soil biology can replenish them, requiring expensive fertilizer applications to maintain plant vigor. Dense root networks also compact soil structure, reducing water infiltration and creating drainage problems that affect the entire garden ecosystem. Proper spacing prevents this competition by ensuring each plant develops its full root territory without interference from neighboring specimens. The spacing calculation must account for both the lateral root spread, which typically extends beyond the visible canopy, and the vertical root development that determines drought tolerance and nutrient accessibility. Professional installations measure these distances precisely during the design phase, rather than adjusting spacing based on visual preferences. The air circulation provided by correct spacing serves multiple functions beyond disease prevention. Adequate airflow helps regulate soil moisture levels, prevents humidity buildup that encourages pest populations, and allows beneficial insects access to plant surfaces for natural pest control. These environmental conditions reduce the need for chemical interventions that add ongoing costs to garden maintenance budgets. Correcting spacing mistakes in existing gardens requires strategic plant removal and relocation during dormant seasons. This process involves calculating current plant territories, identifying overcrowded areas, and redistributing specimens to achieve proper distances. The short-term disruption of established plantings pays long-term dividends through improved plant health and reduced replacement requirements. The spacing protocol also influences companion planting strategies where different perennial species share garden areas. Mixed plantings require spacing calculations that accommodate the largest mature specimen while ensuring smaller plants receive adequate light and root space. This complex arrangement demands precise measurement and planning to prevent dominant species from overwhelming less aggressive neighbors. Correct spacing eliminates 60% of perennial failures by addressing the fundamental resource competition that weakens plant health from establishment onward. The investment in proper spacing prevents the expensive cycle of constant replacement that destroys long-term savings potential, ensuring your perennial selections deliver their full economic value over decades of productive growth. But even perfect spacing won't protect your investment if you skip the foundation work that determines whether your perennials develop the robust root systems they need to survive. The soil preparation disaster unfolds when gardeners assume that perennials will adapt to whatever existing conditions they encounter in native garden soil. This fundamental miscalculation creates shallow, dependent root systems that require constant intervention throughout the plant's lifespan. Most home gardeners dig holes just deep enough to accommodate the nursery container, then backfill with the same soil they removed, creating a planting pocket that restricts root development to the upper soil layers. Perennial root systems require soil amendment to 18 inches depth, extending far beyond the surface layer where initial establishment occurs. This deep preparation zone provides the foundation for extensive root networks that access water and nutrients from multiple soil levels. Without this preparation depth, perennial roots encounter dense, unimproved soil barriers that prevent downward expansion and force lateral growth patterns that remain vulnerable to surface conditions. The amendment process involves incorporating organic matter throughout the entire 18-inch zone rather than simply adding a surface layer of compost. Aged manure and well-decomposed compost must be thoroughly mixed into existing soil to create a uniform growing medium that supports consistent root development. This integration process breaks up compacted soil layers, improves drainage characteristics in clay soils, and enhances water retention capacity in sandy conditions. Finely ground pine bark serves as an additional amendment that improves aeration while contributing to long-term soil structure development. Professional installers execute soil testing protocols that measure pH levels and adjust them to the optimal 6.0 to 7.0 range for maximum nutrient uptake efficiency. Soil pH determines nutrient availability even when adequate fertilizer levels exist in the soil. Perennials planted in soil outside this range cannot access essential minerals regardless of soil fertility levels, creating nutrient deficiency symptoms that gardeners typically address through expensive fertilizer applications rather than pH correction. Lime applications raise pH in acidic soils, while sulfur additions lower pH in alkaline conditions. But these amendments must be incorporated thoroughly during the initial preparation phase. Shallow root development caused by inadequate soil preparation creates dependency cycles that eliminate long-term cost savings. Perennials with restricted root zones require frequent irrigation during normal growing seasons because their limited root territory cannot access deeper soil moisture reserves. This irrigation dependency continues throughout the plant's lifespan, creating ongoing water costs that properly prepared soil eliminates through deep root establishment. The fertilizer requirements of shallow-rooted perennials compound the economic burden of poor soil preparation. Plants with limited root systems cannot efficiently scavenge nutrients from the soil profile, requiring supplemental fertilization to maintain adequate growth rates and flowering performance. Well-prepared soil with proper organic matter incorporation provides sustained nutrient release that supports vigorous growth without ongoing fertilizer inputs. Organic matter addition creates the pore space necessary for root penetration and water movement. while improving nutrient retention capacity. Dense, unimproved soils restrict root expansion through physical barriers that prevent normal development pattern. Well-amended soil holds fertilizer nutrients longer and releases them gradually rather than allowing rapid leaching that wastes expensive inputs. This nutrient retention reduces the fertilizer requirements that burden gardens planted in unimproved soil conditions. The economic analysis of soil preparation investment demonstrates that this investment pays back quickly through reduced maintenance requirement. Initial costs for soil testing, pH adjustment materials, and organic amendments are recovered through eliminated fertilizer purchases and reduced irrigation expenses. This cost recovery accelerates as plants mature and develop the self-sufficient root systems that eliminate ongoing input requirements. The soil preparation protocol must address existing drainage problems that affect root health regardless of organic matter levels. Poor drainage creates anaerobic conditions that prevent root respiration and encourage root rot diseases. Proper soil amendment improves drainage characteristics while maintaining adequate moisture retention for sustained plant growth between rainfall events. Regional soil conditions determine specific amendment requirements that vary based on native soil composition and climate patterns. Clay soils require different organic matter types and incorporation techniques than sandy soils to achieve optimal growing conditions. Professional soil testing identifies these specific requirements and prevents generic amendment approaches that may not address local soil limitations. Proper soil preparation creates the foundation for self-sufficient perennial gardens that thrive without ongoing fertilizer and irrigation inputs, protecting the 20-year savings potential through reduced maintenance requirements. This preparation investment establishes the growing environment necessary for deep root development that supports plant independence from supplemental care throughout their productive lifespan. However, even perfectly amended soil cannot compensate for selecting plants that cannot survive your local climate conditions. Plant selection based on visual appeal rather than climate compatibility destroys more perennial investments than any other single factor. This fundamental error treats hardiness zone ratings as flexible suggestions instead of absolute survival requirements, creating a guaranteed failure scenario that eliminates any possibility of 20-year savings. The USDA Plant Hardiness Zone Map divides regions based on average minimum winter temperatures, ranging from Zone 1 through Zone 13. But most gardeners ignore these scientific classifications when making purchasing decisions. Hardiness zones function like biological boundaries that determine whether perennial root systems can survive winter dormancy periods without cellular damage from freezing temperatures. Plants rated for Zone 5 possess specific physiological adaptations that allow their tissues to withstand temperatures down to -10 degrees Fahrenheit, while Zone 7 perennials lack these cold resistance mechanisms and suffer fatal damage at temperatures below 10 degrees Fahrenheit. These adaptations cannot be modified through care techniques or protection methods. They represent fixed genetic limitations that determine survival outcomes. Zone violations create irreversible damage during the first severe winter when temperatures drop below the plant's survival threshold. Perennial crowns freeze solid, destroying the growing points necessary for spring emergence, while root systems suffer cellular damage that no amount of spring care can remedy. The destruction occurs at the molecular level, where freezing temperatures rupture cell walls and destroy membrane integrity, creating tissue death that eliminates any possibility of recovery. Microclimate variations within individual properties create temperature differentials that complicate hardiness zone applications across garden areas. Foundation plantings benefit from radiant heat emission and wind protection that can elevate local temperatures by 1 full hardiness zone, allowing marginally hardy specimens to survive in these protected locations. Conversely, low-lying areas and north-facing slopes create cold pockets where temperatures drop below the general zone rating, killing plants that would survive in elevated or protected positions. The foundation effect operates through thermal mass principles where building materials absorb solar radiation during daylight hours and release stored heat throughout winter nights. This radiant heating can maintain soil temperatures several degrees above ambient air temperatures, providing the thermal buffer that allows borderline perennials to survive unexpected cold snaps. However, this microclimate benefit applies only within 6 feet of foundation walls and decreases rapidly with distance from heat sources. Professional landscapers often implement the Zone -1 protocol as a conservative safety practice, selecting plants rated 1 full zone colder than the official designation to account for microclimate variations and unusual weather events. This safety margin ensures survival during exceptional cold periods that occur outside normal temperature ranges, protecting plant investments from the extreme weather events that eliminate borderline specimens. The protocol recognizes that hardiness zones represent average conditions rather than worst-case scenarios that determine actual survival outcomes. Nursery stocking practices often prioritize visual appeal and sales volume over local climate suitability, creating inventory filled with plants that cannot survive regional winters. Retail centers stock perennials based on supplier availability and customer demand, rather than hardiness compatibility, leading to displays dominated by attractive specimens that lack local survival capabilities. Sales staff frequently possess limited knowledge of hardiness requirements and focus on immediate aesthetic goals rather than long-term survival potential. The replacement cycle economics demonstrate how zone violations eliminate perennial cost advantages through repeated plant purchases. Initial investments in inappropriate perennials must be duplicated every few years as winter damage destroys established plantings, creating ongoing expenses that exceed annual flower costs over time. The compound effect of replacement purchases eliminates the fundamental economic premise that makes perennial gardening financially attractive compared to annual flower programs. Local extension offices provide accurate hardiness verification services that account for regional climate patterns and microclimate influences affecting plant survival. These resources offer zone maps adjusted for local topography, proximity to large water bodies, and elevation factors that influence winter temperature patterns. Extension recommendations incorporate historical weather data and local growing experience to provide more accurate survival predictions than generic nursery guidance or national zone maps. The zone selection process requires matching perennial hardiness ratings exactly to local zone designations, while incorporating appropriate safety margins for exceptional weather protection. This dual criteria approach ensures survival during normal winter conditions while providing security against the extreme cold events that destroy marginally hardy specimens. The selection discipline prevents the emotional purchasing decisions that lead to climate-inappropriate plant choices based on flower colors or foliage characteristics. Choosing perennials rated for exact hardiness zones with appropriate safety margins ensures 20-year survival potential and protects investment returns from the climate-related failures that destroy long-term saving strategies. The selection discipline requires resisting attractive specimens that cannot survive local conditions, focusing instead on climate-appropriate varieties that deliver sustained performance throughout their productive lifespan. Even climate-appropriate perennials face destruction from a maintenance technique that most gardeners consider essential for plant protection. Mulch application becomes the destruction mechanism when gardeners pile organic material directly against perennial stems, creating 4 to 6 inch deep barriers that transform beneficial soil protection into moisture traps. This technique appears logical since deeper mulch layers provide superior weed suppression and seem to offer maximum plant protection. But the practice creates anaerobic conditions around plant crowns, where harmful bacteria and fungi proliferate in constantly moist environments. The moisture entrapment occurs because thick mulch layers prevent normal evaporation cycles that allow plant crowns to dry between watering or rainfall events. Perennials like Echinacea and Coreopsis possess crown structures that require periodic drying to maintain healthy tissue. But deep mulch contact maintains constant moisture levels that soften crown tissues and create entry points for pathogenic organisms. Crown rot diseases that develop in these conditions spread through entire root systems, killing plants that could otherwise survive for decades with proper air circulation around their base structures. Professional landscapers implement the donut method to prevent these moisture disasters while maintaining mulch benefits throughout the garden area. This technique involves extending organic mulch to the plant's drip line where the outer canopy edge would naturally shed rainfall. but maintaining a clear zone of 2 to 3 inches around each plant stem where no mulch material touches the crown or lower stem sections. The gap allows air circulation to reach plant bases, ensuring that moisture from irrigation or rainfall can evaporate naturally rather than accumulating against sensitive plant tissues. The mulch depth specifications require precise measurement to achieve weed suppression without creating suffocation conditions that damage root systems operating near the soil surface. A 3-inch maximum depth provides adequate coverage to suppress annual weeds and retain soil moisture during dry periods, but deeper applications begin restricting oxygen exchange that roots require for respiration and nutrient uptake. The depth measurement must account for mulch settling that occurs as organic materials decompose, gradually increasing the effective depth unless monitored annually. Organic mulch decomposition creates additional complications that compound moisture retention problems when depth monitoring fails to prevent excessive accumulation. Wood chips, shredded bark, and leaf mulches continue breaking down throughout growing seasons, settling into increasingly dense layers that restrict air movement and water infiltration. This decomposition process requires annual evaluation and adjustment to maintain proper depth specifications, preventing the gradual buildup that suffocates established perennial root systems over multiple growing seasons. Excessive mulch depth provides ideal shelter conditions for slugs, snails, and other moisture-loving pests that feed on perennial foliage during nighttime hours when they emerge from their mulch hiding places. These pest populations establish permanent residence in deep mulch layers, creating ongoing damage cycles that reduce plant vigor and require intervention through expensive pest control products or manual removal efforts. Slug populations flourish in the moist microclimate created by thick mulch applications, using the organic material as both shelter and breeding habitat throughout growing seasons. The drainage disruption caused by excessive mulch extends beyond individual plant health to affect water movement patterns throughout the garden area. Thick, organic layers absorb and retain rainfall that should penetrate to root zones, creating surface saturation while deeper soil layers remain dry. This water redistribution forces shallow root development patterns that make perennials vulnerable to drought stress and reduces their ability to access nutrients stored in lower soil profiles. Proper mulch application prevents these moisture-related failures while maintaining the beneficial aspects that make organic mulching valuable for perennial garden maintenance. The 2 to 3 inch depth specification provides weed suppression and moisture retention without creating the anaerobic conditions that encourage disease development around plant crowns. The gap maintenance around plant stems ensures adequate air circulation while extending mulch benefits throughout the root zone area where they provide maximum value. Annual mulch monitoring prevents the depth accumulation that occurs through decomposition and settling, maintaining optimal specifications that protect plant health while delivering intended benefits. This monitoring process involves measuring existing depth and removing excess material before adding fresh mulch layers, ensuring consistent depth maintenance rather than allowing gradual accumulation that creates problems over time. The economic impact of proper mulching technique extends far beyond immediate plant health benefits. To protect the long-term investment value that makes perennial gardening financially attractive, preventing crown rot and pest damage eliminates the replacement costs that destroy 20-year savings calculations, ensuring that initial plant investments continue producing returns throughout their natural lifespan rather than requiring expensive replacement cycles. Correct mulching technique prevents the moisture-related diseases that kill thousands of dollars worth of perennials over time, protecting garden investments through scientifically sound application methods that maintain plant health without creating conditions that encourage failure. However, even perfect mulch application cannot compensate for irrigation practices that determine whether your perennials develop the self-sufficient root systems essential for long-term survival. Daily light irrigation schedules feel like attentive plant care, but actually train perennial root systems to remain concentrated in the upper soil layers, where they become vulnerable to heat stress and drought conditions. This frequent shallow watering pattern creates a false environment where roots never need to search for deeper water sources, resulting in superficial root development that requires constant irrigation support throughout the plant's entire lifespan. The practice eliminates the fundamental cost-saving advantage that makes perennial gardening economically superior to annual flower programs. Daily watering applications of 15 to 20 minutes create moisture conditions that satisfy immediate plant needs without encouraging the deep root exploration that determines long-term survival capacity. Perennial root systems respond to these surface moisture conditions by concentrating growth in the upper 12 inches of soil, where water remains readily available, never developing the extensive networks that access deeper water reserves during drought periods. This shallow root architecture makes plants dependent on supplemental irrigation even during seasons with normal rainfall patterns. The deep watering protocol forces root systems to grow downward in search of moisture sources, creating the extensive underground networks that allow perennials to access water and nutrients from multiple soil levels. Professional installation teams implement twice-weekly deep watering schedules during the first growing season, applying irrigation slowly enough to penetrate 12 to 18 inches into the soil profile. This penetration depth requires 30 to 45 minutes of application time per irrigation zone, ensuring that water reaches the soil layers where permanent root establishment occurs. The deep watering technique operates through slow application rates that allow soil absorption without surface runoff or pooling that wastes irrigation water. Soaker hoses and drip irrigation systems deliver water at rates that match soil infiltration capacity, ensuring maximum penetration efficiency while preventing the rapid application that creates surface saturation. The slow delivery method encourages downward water movement that draws root development into deeper soil zones, where moisture remains available during extended dry periods. Root architecture development during the critical first-year establishment period determines whether perennials become self-sufficient or require lifelong irrigation support that eliminates economic advantages. Professional installers gradually reduce watering frequency as perennial root systems establish deeper penetration, transitioning from twice-weekly applications to weekly sessions during the second growing season. This frequency reduction encourages continued downward root expansion while maintaining adequate moisture support during the adaptation period. Surface-rooted perennials become irrigation-dependent even during normal rainfall periods because their shallow root zones cannot access the deeper soil moisture that supports drought tolerance. These plants require supplemental watering throughout growing seasons regardless of precipitation patterns, creating ongoing costs that eliminate the economic premise underlying perennial garden investments. The dependency cycle continues throughout the plant's lifespan, requiring irrigation infrastructure and water costs that properly established perennials avoid through deep root development. The economic consequences of shallow root development extend beyond direct irrigation costs to include infrastructure requirements for delivery systems and increased vulnerability to heat stress that reduces plant performance. Shallow-rooted perennials require more frequent replacement due to stress-related decline, creating additional costs that compound the irrigation dependency problems. The replacement cycle eliminates the 20-year savings potential that justifies initial perennial investments over annual flower alternative. Deep root establishment creates drought-resistant plant network that access soil moisture reserves unavailable to shallow-rooted specimens, eliminating irrigation requirements during normal growing conditions. These extensive root systems tap into deeper soil layers where moisture persists during surface drought conditions, providing the water access that allows perennials to maintain growth and flowering performance without supplemental irrigation. The deep root networks also access nutrient reserves throughout the soil profile, reducing fertilizer requirements that add ongoing costs to garden maintenance budgets. The watering transition protocol requires monitoring soil moisture at various depths to ensure adequate penetration without overwatering that could encourage surface root concentration. Professional installers use soil moisture meters to verify that irrigation applications reach the 12 to 18-inch depth necessary for deep root encouragement. This monitoring prevents the overwatering that maintains surface moisture conditions while ensuring adequate deep soil saturation for root development. Establishment success depends on consistent application of deep watering principles throughout the critical first growing season when root architecture develops its permanent structure. Inconsistent watering that alternates between deep and shallow applications creates mixed signals that confuse root development patterns and prevent the uniform deep growth necessary for drought independence. Deep, infrequent watering creates the drought-resistant root systems that allow perennials to thrive without ongoing irrigation, protecting long-term savings through reduced maintenance requirements and infrastructure costs. The technique establishes the foundation for self-sufficient perennial gardens that deliver consistent returns over decades of productive growth. These 5 critical mistakes now reveal why most perennial installations fail, but understanding the problems creates the foundation for implementing the complete solution. Professional installation protocol operates like precision manufacturing, where each standardized step builds upon the previous phase to create conditions that guarantee 20-year survival rates and maximum economic returns. This systematic approach addresses soil preparation, plant selection verification, spacing calculations, and establishment monitoring in a carefully orchestrated sequence that eliminates the 5 critical failures that destroy long-term savings potential. The protocol initiates 6 weeks before any plants enter the ground through comprehensive soil testing that measures pH levels, nutrient content, drainage characteristics, and organic matter percentages throughout the intended planting area. This advanced timeline allows sufficient time for soil amendment integration and pH adjustment completion before installation begins. Soil testing reveals the specific deficiencies and chemical imbalances that must be corrected to support deep root development and nutrient independence over decades of growth. Such adjustment procedures require precise calculation of soil volume and amendment quantities to achieve the optimal 6.0 to 7.0 range necessary for maximum nutrient availability. Lime applications increase pH in acidic soils, while sulfur additions reduce alkaline conditions. But these amendments need weeks of soil integration to achieve stable pH levels throughout the root zone. The timing ensures that soil chemistry reaches optimal parameters before perennial establishment begins, preventing the nutrient deficiency problems that force ongoing fertilizer dependency. Organic matter incorporation follows soil chemistry adjustment through deep tillage that integrates aged compost and well-decomposed manure to the full 18-inch depth requirement. This amendment process creates the soil structure necessary for deep root penetration while establishing the nutrient reserves that support independent plant growth without supplemental fertilization. The organic matter integration must achieve uniform distribution throughout the soil profile rather than creating layered zones that restrict root development patterns. Plant selection verification operates through multiple confirmation steps that ensure hardiness compatibility, mature size accuracy, and bloom time coordination for continuous seasonal color production. Cross-reference hardiness ratings through local extension offices and regional growing experience to confirm survival potential under local climate conditions. The verification process includes the Zone -1 safety protocol that accounts for exceptional weather events and microclimate variations within individual properties. Mature size specifications determine exact spacing calculations that prevent the overcrowding disasters that force expensive replacement cycles throughout garden lifespans. Each perennial variety requires individual spacing measurement based on mature width divided by 2, plus the additional distance that ensures adequate air circulation between plant canopies at full development. These calculations create the spacing grid that guides installation layout and prevents the resource competition that weakens plant health over time. The installation sequence positions the largest perennial specimens first, then works systematically towards smaller plants to ensure proper visual balance and spacing accuracy. This methodical approach prevents spacing errors that occur when smaller plants are installed first and create false reference points for larger specimen positioning. The sequential installation also ensures that root zone preparation receives appropriate attention for each plant size category. Optimal timing windows concentrate installation activities during early spring or fall periods, when moderate temperatures and increased rainfall patterns support rapid root establishment without heat stress complications. Spring installation occurs after soil temperature reaches consistent levels above 40 degrees Fahrenheit, while fall timing requires completion 6 weeks before hard frost to allow adequate root development before winter dormancy. These timing parameters maximize establishment success while minimizing transplant shock that weakens long-term plant performance. The establishment protocol implements deep watering schedules that penetrate 12 to 18 inches below surface level twice weekly during the first growing season. This watering depth encourages downward root development that creates the drought tolerance necessary for irrigation independence in subsequent years. The application technique uses slow delivery methods that prevent surface runoff while ensuring adequate soil penetration to the depths where permanent root establishment occurs. Mulching application follows the donut method specifications that maintain organic material at proper depth while preserving the air circulation gaps around plant crowns that prevent moisture-related disease development. The 3-inch maximum depth provides weed suppression and moisture retention without creating the anaerobic conditions that encourage crown rot and fungal infiltration. Gap maintenance around plant stems ensures adequate drying cycles that protect crown health throughout growing seasons. Monitoring procedures track plant performance indicators during the critical 90-day establishment period when transplant shock symptoms appear and root development patterns become established. Document watering schedules, growth progress, and any stress symptoms that require intervention to protect plant health. This monitoring system identifies problems during the correction window when proper care techniques can prevent permanent damage to establishment success. Documentation systems record plant locations, variety specifications, installation dates, and maintenance schedules that ensure consistent long-term care throughout the garden's productive lifespan. These records provide essential information for monitoring plant performance, planning replacement schedules, and maintaining proper care techniques that protect investment returns over decades of operation. Following this complete protocol eliminates the 5 critical installation mistakes and creates the optimal growing environment that allows your 7 secret perennials to deliver their full economic potential. The systematic approach transforms perennial gardening from a series of costly failures into a reliable investment strategy that delivers measurable returns through sustained performance and minimal maintenance requirements. These 5 installation variables create the technical foundation that separates successful perennial gardens from expensive replacement cycles that destroy long-term savings potential. Proper spacing calculations prevent root competition disasters, while 18-inch soil preparation creates the foundation for drought-resistant root development. Hardiness zone verification with safety margins ensures winter survival. Correct mulching technique prevents crown rot diseases, and deep watering protocols establish the extensive root networks that eliminate irrigation dependency. The systematic approach transforms perennial gardening from guesswork into precision agriculture that delivers measurable returns over decades of productive growth. What surprised you the most about these installation mistakes? Which technique will you implement first in your own perennial garden? If this detailed breakdown helped you avoid costly failures, hit that like button and subscribe for more professional growing techniques that protect your garden investments.